Hey everybody, my name is SirCrest, and today I'm going to be taking a look at The Long Dark. And this is a little bit different because I recorded footage beforehand to make sure I could focus on what I was saying as well as not die in the game, even though I didn't do a very good job of that. So, I've been playing quite a bit of The Long Dark the last few days, and I'm really impressed with it. But just like some other survival games, I think it has some notable issues. And it shares some problems with games like Darkwood or Salt. There's been an influx of these games that go for their own particular perspective on survival. This one happens to be a very realistic and perhaps very lonely look at survival, actual wilderness survival. And so this is based in, or supposedly takes place in Canada. And what's interesting about this is that basically you are dropped in this area due to I think it was a geomagnetic disaster down to your plane, and pretty much you have clothes, you have a flare, and that's about it. You have no food, you have, I don't think you have any water, so you need to quickly find what you need in order to survive. Now, in this particular version of the game right now, which is 0.127, which released yesterday evening, you have one region or one map, and you spawn in so far, one of like 4 locations for me. And they're all relatively connected. I've done about 10 playthroughs so far. This one happens to be currently my longest one, which is actually still running. And what's interesting is that there's no map in the game yet, but the more you play, the more you recognize the scenery, and now I know, which end of the railroad I need to go to get to whichever location. And there's 3 primary locations, like the dam, the trapper's homestead, and I can't remember the other one. But there's basically these three primary locations where you can find a lot of your supplies. So in this area, as you're outside, there is an air temperature, which varies depending on where you are and the time of day and the weather. There's also a wind chill effect, which affects the actual perceived or felt temperature, obviously, like what it feels like. And an interesting aspect, I'm just go ahead and say this is going to be a very flowing overview of the game. So an interesting aspect is that if you can see which direction the wind is going. Now right now there really isn't any wind. You may sometimes see that I go into my menu right there, and you can see wind chill is -5 degrees Celsius. That will change depending on the weather, and in some really gusty areas you will see that it gets up to like -15 or something like that. And in those particular scenarios, it's advantageous to walk up against hillsides because you will be blocked by the wind, and therefore the actual temperature you are feeling goes down. Now, if you're wearing lots of layers and lots of higher level equipment, you will be less susceptible to that wind chill. So this game is full of decisions and choices, even the route you take to get to somewhere. A route may be hilly, or it may be straight but longer. Now that hilly area might be more risky because you might sprain an ankle, which causes you to not be able to sprint, you walk slower, and it can damage your condition. So this particular area I'm in right now is the dam. It's a very secluded area, it's very quiet, and it's quite dark. But it has quite a lot of features in the beginning if you get there. Relatively a good amount of supplies and first aid and stuff like that, but not really much food. You need to look around for other food sources. What's neat is the audio in this area. It's just so quiet in here, and I love that aspect. So what I'm doing right here is starting a fire in this little pan here, and throughout the game there are these random, or maybe not random, but percentage of success, and the higher your skill of starting fires or cutting down wood or repairing things will increase both the time that fire lasts as well as how likely that fire is to start. Now there are things like accelerants, which are basically lighter fluid that you can increase the possibility of it lighting, but you may not necessarily need that later as your skill is increased by starting more fires. So for the fires you have different types of wood. Fir, for instance, will last a long time but is very hard to light, so you may want to use something like cedar, which doesn't last very long but is very easy to light. and then put fur on later, or just save it for crafting. Now, speaking of the crafting system, there really isn't a crafting system. It's more so a management of the supplies that you have. So for example, in that little survival menu, you've seen something like repair and harvest. Harvest is where you can take an item and get its raw materials. If you break down a pair of jeans, you'll get cloth. If you break down a pair of boots, you'll get leather. And if you break down, say, a worthless pair of, can opener, or pair, a can opener. Oh, here's the sound again. A great aspect is the audio in this game, but I'll get to that in a minute. So if you have a spare can opener that you don't need and it's very low condition or it's in bad shape, you can break that down into scrap metal, which you can use to repair another can opener that is a much higher level or much higher quality, much better condition, or perhaps a rifle that you need to use. So in this case, I have the rifle out, and you can get that in typically in one of those 3 locations I mentioned before, even though I only mentioned 2. And once you break down that item, you can use it to increase the effective quality of another item that you actually use.
Never know. Could end up being useful.
So there really isn't crafting, it's just utilizing the parts that you probably don't necessarily need in order to keep the items that you do need. It's a very interesting system, but I have a lot of complaints with the crafting system in general. For instance, the time it takes to actually harvest materials from something might take half an hour. I don't know about you, but for some items where it's typically more difficult, say, like cutting a pair of jeans apart to get cloth, that doesn't really take me 10 minutes or 15 minutes. You can kind of rip it apart if you have it at certain seams and you have just a knife or something. What's also interesting, though, is that in my experience, it doesn't seem like having tools in the game affects how quickly you can harvest something. But that's my experience. That may be different. But the time it takes to do everything is very important because this game, anytime you are not in the main menu, basically if the game is open, you are burning calories. And calories are one of those 4 currencies of the game, because you have to find food and you have to cook it. You have to make sure it's good to eat. You cannot just eat anything because you might get food poisoning, which will cause you to need to rest and take antibiotics, etc. A lot of the crafting systems, in my opinion, take too long, and because of that, they burn too many calories. Running to the other side of the lake burns like an entire granola bar worth of energy or something ridiculous like that. That type of economy of calories is problematic, I find. Now, many people that I've spoken to say, well, you need to have that balance. You need to have that drive. But in my opinion, then the focus on the dangers of the game is too broad. Basically, you're fighting everything, but everything in this situation should not be equal. Because, for example, your clothing wears out. Wears out in a few days. It may be completely gone in a week or 2, which, I don't know about you, but I've worn the same pair of shoes for 4 years or something like that. Now, obviously, in this particular game, in this particular setting, that may be gone down, or that may be accelerated because it's in a hostile environment. Same with, gloves or something. That may be gone very quickly due to how often you use them. But things like the can opener actually degrades what seems rather significant each time you open a can. I've used the same can opener for 20 years. I think that's an item that, yeah, sure, it could be degraded, but not after 20 cans, that I need to get a new one, or I need to repair it. And you can see here in this particular scenario that the weather changes, and I'm forced to go back to my abode. But also you can hear the wind kind of changing as I get behind certain surfaces so that the wind is blocked. And you can see that the wind chill drops to -1 degree when I'm next to something. But when I'm out in the open, it goes up to, I think, -11. So that crafting system, yes, it's important to drive people to do things. However, I think that shouldn't be necessarily the driver for it. I think, for instance, your clothing wears down just by wearing it. So if you go to sleep, you're losing condition. on your items. So maybe it's advantageous, like in that particular example, maybe make it so that it's used more during travel. Shoes don't degrade just by them being on a foot. They degrade by being worn. So perhaps have them be degraded by distance traveled, or your gloves by how much you use items or something like that. I think those are particular scenarios where having them degrade fast is fine, or have them a short lifetime. But in the situations in which they are degraded, needs to be refined, I think. This was, I was speaking with someone as well about, this is kind of a particular kind of aspect to pixel piracy that I talked about, where you have these, it's good to have certain aspects of the game in which you are pushing the player to behave differently, but do it more focused as far as strategy goes. Because right now I'm being pushed to watch out that my jacket doesn't fall apart, in a few days. Or I feel like I'm constantly checking that aspect, or my tools, or my hatchet that seems to fall apart every time I use it. Those aspects are needed, and they are useful in creating a strong push for people to search out these items. But I don't think that the game is doing them in the right manner. But again, that's my opinion. So a while ago, I was talking about the audio. Now, what's really nice is that almost every option you use in the game has a bit of high-quality Foley that goes with it. The sound mixing is really good, I find. When you're in these rooms, the reverb feels really impactful. It feels really desolate. Now, a lot of the areas in the game are not 100% silent. There's a small amount of room tone, which is very important. But then as you walk, each time your foot hits the ground, it has this resonance to it that I think really builds up to the loneliness of this game. You are very lonely. You will find other people in the game, but they are not alive. They're frozen. You'll find bodies throughout the world on the ground, and you'll find them in cabins, because I suppose they've starved to death or something. So the audio is a very good strong point of the game. Every time you drink or eat something, if you open a can, you'll hear the can opener opening up the can, and you can hear the person eating. It's a really nice, impactful sound to it. So all these little aspects are really, really, I suppose they feel satisfying to do, which is very important with a game that has a heavy emphasis on management. You want that stuff to feel satisfying, or else it's going to kind of feel like a chore. I know that's kind of a small point, but that's what I've experienced while playing this game. Now, as I was talking about the difficulty of the game, because the game is in some ways randomly generated, the world is the same, but the way items are dropped is randomized. I found that in this particular playthrough that I really didn't come across very many wolves, even though in my other ones, or in my previous playthroughs where I did have a really hard time, I ran into a ton of wolves. The randomized aspect does make the game feel a bit different each time. In fact, there's one special wolf that apparently is supposed to spawn near the dam in certain situations. Now, in this particular playthrough, it didn't spawn, so I assume that it didn't spawn anywhere. That's based upon my understanding throughout what I've read on the forums. So that randomized aspect it helps to build a sense of exploration. Once you play enough of the game, you know where things are. It becomes more so a strategy game rather than necessarily exploration. I think in the future, once they expand these areas and add more maps, there is going to be a better sense of exploration. But for right now, it's a matter of memorizing where areas are, and then just figuring out what's the likelihood this item is going to spawn in this location. Now, I think that's not something you can necessarily avoid for a game that is not procedurally generated in the map. It's not going to be Minecraft because of the way there's so many special little areas where they specifically try to avoid shortcuts in some situations, I find, which can be pretty frustrating. But these are crafted maps that probably can't be as effectively procedurally generated as something that was created, and just having small randomized aspects as far as what items spawn, where the wolves are, where the deer are, etc. Now, I suppose the corollary for that, I hope I'm using that term right, is the fact that you'll go to some cabins that usually are really good, and then suddenly they have nothing except a bunch of tinder plugs, which you have no use for because you already have 40 of them. And that's something I experienced in my previous playthrough of this game, is that all these cabins that I relied on so much before suddenly had almost nothing in them except newspaper when I was desperately in need of something to drink or something to eat. So that absolutely, as frustrating as it is, looking back, it adds a huge amount of stress to the game, which is good because, this actual situation should be very stressful. I mean, this is survival. So there's aspects where if you need something and it's not there, you need to make a new game plan. And that brings me on to the aspects of choices. And I kind of messed with this in the past, but the calorie system and the fatigue system has a huge impact, I find, on the choices. Because every time you are not in the main menu or in the options menu, you are making a choice. How long you spend looking at your inventory, you're burning calories, and you're becoming thirsty, and you're getting tired, and you might be getting cold. Every time you check the temperature, you're burning calories. Every time you're harvesting something, you're burning calories. Every time you repair something, you're burning calories. All these things have an influence in the way that you play, especially later once you do a couple playthroughs and you get a feel for how the game works. And that, again, as annoying as it is almost like no other game I've played, because even some games where there is a hunger system, it is so detached, the way that it affects the gameplay. It might be, something like Minecraft, where if you're hungry, you don't regenerate health. But in this, you are so conscious, or you should be so conscious, of every aspect of your character. Every time, for example, right here, as I'm boiling it, you can see how much wood energy is basically left. And if you can't cook that piece of venison in that 25-minute window, that you're screwed, because you can't eat it, or else you'll get food poisoning. So there's a huge amount of there's tiny razor-thin margins, which is where I was being told that today during one of my streams that some people are up to 50 days because they're min-maxing every aspect of the game. So they figured out, how many times they can boil water in certain types of logs, or they completely switch clothes when they come inside in order to not wear them down so they can last a lot longer, so they don't have to repair them as much. All these different choices add a huge dimension to the game that I hope will be expanded as time goes on and the game is updated. Because right now the game pretty much just released on Steam Early Access. And right here you can see just the incredible darkness of the room, and then the fire goes out. And that silence and isolation is so powerful, and is one thing that I really love in games. And this is not a horror game, even though it's really creepy in here, because it feels like this cold, dark, depressing, abandoned area, which is almost exactly what it is. This area is not specifically made creepy. I would imagine that this is exactly what that place is like, regardless of the stylized look of the game. So that choice, or that metagame, I suppose, in a way, with the way that you are, by not choosing something, you are making a choice. Indecision is a really bad thing in a game like this. But early on, when you're given lots of supplies, or the supplies that are already pre-generated, allows you a little bit of free time to look at your menus and such. But you'll begin to appreciate how fast you have to react. You want to make a beeline for that cliff so you can make another beeline to the next area. Now, switching subjects, let's talk about somewhat of the end game. Now, just to be clear here, this is the longest I have gotten in the game so far, about 4.5 days or so as of the end of this video. Now, already I kind of feel a pattern because I've explored nearly all of the areas of this map, I believe, because I've seen the same areas quite a bit. I assume that's most of what there is left. And what I've gathered from my playing, as well as gathered from what people have told me and my impressions from the forums as well, is that you end up getting in a routine or a rhythm in order to survive in this game. Now, in real life, obviously, we have our own routines. But right now, as of recording this video, there really isn't, besides getting to the dam to get the rifle, it doesn't feel like there's necessarily an end goal. Because it's kind of like that saying where there's two kinds of people. People who are dead and people who are dying. And that can apply here. You're either dead and starting a new game, or you're just failing slower. That's what it feels like right now due to the content in the game right now. I hope that is expanded. I would like there to be a particular win state far off in the game where, you have to collect supplies or get to a certain area, an area vastly far away. So there's like these 150-day games working your way through this tundra in order to get to like a radio station to call in a rescue or something like that. That would be fantastic. Right now, though, there is no story implemented. This is purely sandbox, and there's quite a few features even of the sandbox that are not implemented yet, like the map, like I said, and the work table, which I think allows you to craft things. But right now, that's not implemented. I would like to see that aspect in the story. I assume so, but that's, just looking at the game as it is right now. And so, in games like Minecraft, it's very easy to quickly get in the routine. All you need is to put bone meal on the grass to get seeds, and then you can start growing wheat, and suddenly you have infinite food, and you don't need to worry. Now, this game certainly is not nearly as difficult or as simple to get to that level, but I feel like this game right now still has a similarity to that. Now, there are a limited amount of bullets on the land, so you will not be able to shoot indefinitely. There's also a limited amount of medical supplies, or of metal, or cloth, or all this stuff. That's all limited. That spawns in. Again, as far as I know, based upon my playthroughs and the information I've gathered on the forums and what people have told me. So you're not going to last forever. That's kind of not going to happen. The most you can do, again, is minimize as much as possible how much you use your items. A lot of people will push deer into packs of wolves and have them be killed, and then once the wolves go away, they harvest the meat. So that's kind of the aspect that people are going for right now, where they don't have to shoot or anything like that. So speaking on my own as the video is playing has allowed me to probably go into a little more descriptive detail than I otherwise would be able to with the game running at the same time as I'm playing. So I want to talk about the visuals. Already you can see it is very stylized. Textures are, look painted or drawn, which I really like. The game graphically, though, is quite limited. In fact, I would call it graphically primitive. It's not pushing necessarily the boundaries of graphics, but it has a very, very good design and a very pleasing, somber, quite a realistic tone to it. Obviously, textures are very stylized, but the actual atmosphere of the game feels rich and natural, especially the sunsets and sunrise. At night, though, the stars seem to glow like they're, 10 miles away, which is a bit distracting. There's also, and when we're talking about technical issues, there is a huge amount of Z-fighting. I believe the term is Z-fighting, where textures overlaid on one another flicker a lot. Now, I'm not a developer, so I don't know the core cause of this, but that is very distracting when it's flickering between rock and snow, which are two very different colors. So that's very noticeable when you're walking around the world. The other one is performance. This game runs horrible on my machine, and I actually run it on high, I think, or one of the middle settings. I'm running this particular video at 1080p, and most of the time it's around 25 FPS. Sometimes indoors it can drop below 10 frames per second, with or without SLI turned on. Forget about running it over 1080p for my system. Now, as many of you know, I run two GTX 580s, 3 gigabytes of VRAM per video card, a 3770K, 3 gigs of RAM, blah, blah, blah. I'm on an SSD as well, so load times are very, very good. If you notice in the video, I clicked load, and I was instantly in the game. Load times are very good. But technically speaking, the performance is something that absolutely has to be improved, and I'm expecting it to be. I'm not just hoping it, because there's no way that other people can play that. Now the view distances in the game are unbelievably good. You can look down a valley or something and see a house and be like, all right, that's the house that I need to go to. There's enough detail there, even at 1080p, that you can decipher what type of building something is. That's very nice. But outside of that, the thing is, the performance is the worst inside, especially if you have light on. You can see the stuttering here when I move. And that's really, really distracting, even without recording. It can drop to like 15 frames per second. Now, the game can hit quite high frame rates, but typically it's outside looking at the sky, which is, not very useful. There is one other aspect that I want to talk about that is kind of my FOV slider, and that is chromatic aberration. This game has chromatic aberration in the corners. Now, just because this is my soapbox, please stop doing that in games. Now, this one at least seems to be doing some sort of yellow cyan chromatic aberration, which is more lens-like, which is more realistic, but the problem is you don't really get noticeable chromatic aberration unless you're using a plastic lens from the 30s or something. That simply just doesn't occur in anything, especially not in the human eye, because even if it did happen, you don't notice it due to the brain. So that's an issue I have. If you notice in the top right and left of the screen, it's kind of like it's actually more of a purple-green shift. It doesn't need to be there. I can understand vignette or maybe a slight softening, but chromatic aberration just doesn't make any sense. Again, this game is stylized, so I understand that there's a artistic choice there. The other thing is there is a very heavy unsharp mask being applied. If you notice against the sky on trees, there's this halo effect. Basically, there's probably another name for it in graphics, but effectively it's what would be called an unsharp mask. Basically, you blur the image, you invert it, and it's used to create local contrast against edges without using a typical sharpening filter. I find it kind of cool, but also incredibly distracting. It looks like I'm looking through a Polaroid or something. Now, if that's what they're going for, then good job. But I guess what I'm saying is they need to figure out, okay, are they going for stylized realism? Which I can understand the textures and the models being that way, because that doesn't even enter my imagination when I'm playing. But some of the graphical, you can see some of the Z fighting right there. Some of the choices as far as the effects involved are something that I question quite a bit. And but outside of that, game looks very good. Sound is great. You can feel the wind almost moving around you, and already it totally nails that feeling of being out in the cold, isolated, with just the crows. I don't know if it's crows. It shouldn't be crows, but that's what it sounds like. But with the animals all around you, you can hear the wolves around you. You feel like I said, you can almost imagine the wind blowing by you. Now, one last thing I want to say is that breath, it's cool, except when it's dark. Because I guess it's an additive filter, which makes it almost completely white at night. So you can't see in front of you because of your breath. I've been in some very cold regions before, and I've never seen it that bright before. Especially since there's no light source, especially at night. It's starlight or something. So I don't know why it's that bright. I wish that were toned back a bit. Anyways, I think I've talked enough about this game. At its current stage, it is $20 in Steam Early Access. Now, I've come up with this new kind of gauge for it because you are never guaranteed that a game is going to be updated, even though I'm hugely optimistic about this game and its developer. However, in its current state, it is going for $20 on Steam. Think about, would you pay $20 for this game in its current state? I would say no. And obviously, you can think to yourself, well, it's $20, but I get all these updates. But just for the sake of making yourself safer against, any possible problems with development, think about, would you be satisfied with the game in its current state right now? And I don't think I would pay $20 for this game right now. 10, absolutely. Because it's fleshed out in so many areas. I think is probably how I would sum it up. It's fleshed out in so many areas, but those areas just don't go out very far. So in its current state, I would hold off, but keep an eye out for it. This honestly takes a really good approach to survival games that I think we kind of needed. It's not a horror game. It's actually, here's a good comparison. You know how Salt, I said, was really, really primitive, but it had a very open and relaxing atmosphere? This is a game where you sit down and you are put in a really stressful situation. This is a game that you constantly have to think about. This is the dark side of Salt. It's not a horror game, but it's a very powerful experience as you play, if you get immersed, and I get immersed very easily. But I think I've talked enough, so thank you for watching, and who knows, I might do more videos on this in the future, but we're a while away from that. Anyways, hope you enjoyed, and if you enjoyed this video or whatever, be sure to subscribe to this channel for more impressions and reviews and such like that, and I will see you next time on my next video. Talk to you later.